Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. My son's hand was in mine when they shoved us. It happened fast. The sky was calm, moonlit. The waves, gentle. A perfect night on the Dawson family cruise. Until it wasn't. Mark felt the shove against his back. Hard. Deliberate. He didn't have time to scream. Just instinct. He gripped Kyle's tiny fingers tighter as they fell. His mother's face was the last thing he saw. Blank. Cold. Like it meant nothing. They hit the water with a slap so loud it echoed in Mark's ears underwater. Salt burned his eyes. He surfaced choking, gasping, still holding Kyle, who sputtered and clung to him, crying. "Daddy, what happened?" Mark's mind raced. "Hold on to me," he shouted, spitting out seawater. "Don't let go." The cruise ship's lights shimmered in the distance, pulling away. No alarms. No rescue. Nothing. They'd planned this. His own parents pushed him and his son into the Atlantic Ocean like trash. Mark's muscles screamed as he kicked against the current, keeping Kyle afloat. "You're okay. I've got you," he repeated, as much for himself as for his son. But inside, something snapped. This wasn't just betrayal. This was an execution. Why? Why would they do this? And more than that, how long had Rachel known? The water stretched endlessly, black and swallowing. Hours passed, maybe longer. Mark couldn't tell anymore. The cold crept into his bones. Kyle had fallen asleep in his arms, his body limp, too tired to cry. Mark's arms were trembling. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. Then a lights. Dim. Moving. A boat. Small. Closer than the cruise ship had ever been. "Help?" Mark's voice cracked. "Please. Over here." A man shouted in Spanish. A spotlight swept over them. Mark raised Kyle's limp arm. The boat turned. Closer. Closer. Two men hauled them aboard. Kyle coughed hard, rolled to his side, breathing shallowly. One man wrapped him in a blanket. The other pressed a bottle of water to Mark's lips. "Americano?" the man asked. Mark nodded, too weak to speak. They were alive. But nothing about this felt like survival. Not yet. Later, wrapped in a wet blanket and shivering, Mark stared at the dark horizon. Not toward home, but toward the past. He replayed his mother's blank stare, his father's silence, and Rachel. Sweet, smiling Rachel. The woman who told him this trip would fix things. He looked down at his still-soaked pocket. His phone. Waterproof case. Maybe, just maybe, he could still use it. Because if they thought he drowned, they had already started celebrating. And Mark needed to see how deep the betrayal went. Rachel looked stunning in black. A silk dress. Diamond earrings. Her hair pulled back just enough to show grief, but not ruin the look. Reporters circled the front steps of Gerald's mansion. Rachel clutched a tissue. "Cried just enough. He was a good man," she told the camera. Her voice cracked. And the ocean took him. Inside, she sipped wine with Gerald, the same man who gave her that necklace. The one Mark had noticed months ago. The one she claimed was just a gift from Mom. Now she wore it openly. Gerald poured another glass. "You pulled it off well," he said with a smirk. Rachel raised an eyebrow. We pulled it off." He laughed. "Right. We." No one questioned why Rachel stayed with Gerald after her husband's death. No one questioned how she'd inherited nearly everything. But there were cracks. One reporter caught her smirking when she thought no one was watching. Another asked why no Coast Guard alert was issued the night Mark vanished. Rachel dodged. "I was asleep. I didn't know he was gone until the next morning." She never saw the phone vibrating in her bedroom drawer. A private number. An image message. It was a blurry shot. Two figures. A man and a child. Soaked. Alive. The text read, "You smiled too soon." The Cuban fisherman who rescued them didn't speak much English, but his eyes showed something universal: pity. Mark lay on a thin cot in a windowless cabin, holding Kyle, who shivered in his sleep. The boat docked near a rundown village hours later. Locals looked at them with wide eyes. Two soaked Americans washed ashore in the night. An older woman handed Mark a tattered hoodie and a cracked phone charger. Policia, she asked. No, Mark said quickly, clutching Kyle tighter. Please. No police. He didn't know who he could trust. If his parents were in on it, if Rachel planned this, he couldn't risk alerting anyone before he had a plan. That night, Mark plugged in his phone. The lock screen flickered on. 1% battery. He held his breath and opened his messages. 6 unread texts from Rachel. Fake concern. Where are you? Please come back to the room. We're worried. And then, silence. He opened his hidden folder. Screenshots. Voicemails. One video. Proof. He had doubted himself for months, wondered if he was paranoid. He wasn't. Rachel wasn't just cheating. She was plotting. He scrolled through a message Gerald had sent her. Once he's out of the way, it's all yours. I'll handle the paperwork. Mark gritted his teeth so hard his jaw popped. He looked down at Kyle, asleep in a bundle of blankets. I won't let them win, he whispered. Not like this. The revenge didn't need to be loud. Not yet. It needed to be precise. The old woman let Mark stay in her cousin's home, a crumbling one-bedroom with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. But for now, it was safe. Mark used the time to go through everything on his phone. Every clue. Every red flag he'd ignored. Rachel had started pulling away 6 months ago. Shorter replies. Unexplained nights out. Sudden expensive clothes. When Mark questioned her, she brushed him off with a kiss and silence. But now, the messages were like knives. Gerald had written, she's smarter than he is. We'll be free soon. Rachel had replied, he's too soft. He won't fight back. Mark felt bile rise in his throat. He nearly smashed the phone. He didn't. Instead, he found an old contact in his phone, Jordan, a college friend who now worked in cybersecurity. He tapped out a message. Need to talk. Urgent. Private. Then he backed up everything: texts, call logs, voice recordings, and encrypted it into a hidden drive. Next, he took a selfie with Kyle, both of them alive, healthy, and holding today's newspaper. He didn't post it publicly. He sent it directly to Rachel. No words. Just the image. Her red receipt popped up seconds later. She didn't reply. But Mark imagined her face. He could see the wine glass slipping from her hand. Could hear the glass shatter. She thought he was dead. Now she'd have to wonder, how much did he know? And more importantly, what was he going to do next? Mark crossed back into the U.S. under a fake identity. A friend of Jordan's helped arrange a quiet return flight from Havana to Miami. No customs. No fingerprints. He didn't go home. He went to the one place no one would look, a cheap motel off the interstate, with flickering lights and curtains that didn't close right. The TV played a morning news report. Mark Dawson declared legally dead. Wife and family in mourning. No criminal investigation pending. Mark stood frozen, toothbrush in hand. No investigation. They weren't even pretending to care. Then the reporter said something else. Rachel Dawson was seen last night attending a gala hosted by billionaire businessman Gerald Rawlings, her late husband's stepfather. Mark sank into the motel bed, staring at the screen. There she was. Rachel. Smiling. Wearing the same necklace Gerald had given her 2 years ago. The one she claimed was just a thank you for organizing a family dinner. She leaned into him in the photo. A polished, perfect widow. Gerald stood behind her, one hand on her waist. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a performance. They were parading their victory while he was meant to be rotting at the bottom of the ocean. Mark picked up his phone and dialed. Jordan answered. You good, man? I need everything you've got on Gerald Rawlings, Mark said. His voice was calm. Too calm. And I mean everything. Emails. Property. Bribes. Offshore accounts. You name it. Jordan paused. You're alive. Jesus, man. I know what they thought. Mark stared at the screen. Time to make them wish they'd finished the job. Rachel adjusted her earring in the mirror, the diamonds sparkling beneath the ballroom lights. Every step she took echoed confidence, measured, calculated. But her hand trembled when she checked her phone. No new messages. Just that haunting photo from the night before, Mark and Kyle. Alive. Drenched. Holding the damn newspaper. She deleted it. Tried to. but it wouldn't go away from her mind. Gerald approached from behind, placing a hand on her shoulder. Smile. The cameras are loving you tonight. Rachel turned, forcing her face into something close to warmth. Do they know I'm a grieving widow, or just the next socialite? He smirked. Does it matter? Either way, they pity you. That makes them predictable. She hated the way he said that, but she needed him. For now. Still, something about that photo gnawed at her. The timestamp was real. The kid looked unharmed. No visible injuries, just exhaustion in his eyes. The kind of exhaustion only survival leaves behind. What if he's back? She asked quietly. Gerald didn't flinch. He can't be. Not without evidence. And even if he is, you're legally in the clear. Rachel nodded. But in her purse, her hand gripped her phone tighter than necessary. The photographer snapped another picture of them as they entered the gala hall. Perfect widow. Perfect benefactor. No one saw the cracks under the foundation. But Rachel felt it. And Mark knew. Somewhere, watching, waiting. And she was beginning to realize, dead men don't send photos. Mark shaved in front of the motel mirror, each stroke of the blade slow, deliberate. His reflection looked like a man who'd come back from the dead, and in a way, he had. Clean-shaven. Alive. Ready. Cal sat on the bed behind him, eating cereal from a paper cup and watching cartoons. Dad, when are we going home? Mark paused. The word home didn't mean what it used to. Soon, he said, though the lie sat heavy in his throat. We just have to do one more thing first. Jordan arrived that afternoon. He knocked once, code they'd agreed on since college. Mark opened the door. Man, Jordan exhaled, stepping inside. I thought you were a ghost. Mark smiled faintly. Close enough. They sat at the small desk by the window, Cal drifting to sleep on the bed behind them. Jordan dropped a USB drive onto the table. Gerald's been laundering money through shell companies tied to one of your father's old businesses. Offshore, Cayman-based. Mark's jaw clenched. Of course, he used my father's name. Rachel's involved too, Jordan added. Emails, bank accounts, even signed off on one of the transfers 2 days before you disappeared. Mark's fingers tapped against the wood. They thought I was soft, he said. That I'd roll over and die quietly. Jordan leaned back. What's the plan? Mark opened his laptop, brought up a blank email draft. He attached one of the documents. We drip this out. Not all at once. One breadcrumb at a time. We make them paranoid. Jordan grinned. You want to haunt them? Mark's eyes stayed on the screen. No. I want them to feel what drowning really feels like. In a quiet legal office on the edge of Atlanta, Mark sat across from the only person who hadn't betrayed him, Ava Wallace, his late father's former attorney. She stared at him for a full 10 seconds before whispering, You're supposed to be dead. Mark nodded. Not yet. She pushed aside the stack of condolence letters and leaned in. If this is real, you need to be careful. Gerald moved fast. Had your death certificate filed within 48 hours. Unheard of. He even used your father's old legal contacts to move your assets into Rachel's name. Which assets? Mark asked. Everything, Ava said. House, stocks, business shares, retirement, the family trust. Mark's heart pounded. The trust was never meant to pass through marriage. Ava nodded. Gerald made sure your father changed that. He influenced the amendment before your father passed. I have the paper trail, but I didn't know the depth of it until now. Mark looked down at the documents in front of him. His name, crossed out. Deceased. They've erased you. He stood, walked to the window. The city moved below. Cars. Lives. People who thought justice still meant something. And if I'm not dead, Ava smiled. Then this becomes a war. He turned back toward her. Can you help me win it? She didn't hesitate. Absolutely. As he walked out of her office, a plan was forming. This wouldn't be about just exposing Rachel. Or Gerald. This was bigger. They didn't just try to kill him. They rewrote him out of his own bloodline. And now he would rewrite the ending they thought they controlled. In the dark of the motel room, Mark lit a match. Just one. He stared at the photo pinned to the wall. Rachel and Gerald laughing at a rooftop dinner. The same photo that had made headlines 2 days after his funeral. Mark held the flame beneath the image. The edges curled, blackened, but he didn't let it burn all the way. He needed to remember who they were when they thought he was gone. Kyle was asleep in the next room, breathing soft and steady. Mark closed the door, opened his laptop, and uploaded one of the leaked financial reports to an encrypted email address. Recipient: investigative.journalist@postpress.com. Subject: Widow's Gold message. Follow the trail. Start with Dawson Capital. Then ask about the Rawlings Trust. He hit send. The flame was lit. Back at Gerald's mansion, Rachel woke to find an envelope on her doorstep. No return address. Inside, a printout of the same image she received on her phone. Mark and Kyle. Alive. And a post-it stuck to the bottom. If you're wondering who saw you lie, he did. Rachel's knees buckled. Her scream echoed down the marble hall. Gerald rushed in, half-dressed. What happened? She threw the photo at him. He's alive. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tightening. We need to move fast. Lock down accounts. Call the lawyer. And Rachel, if he's alive, then everything we built is at risk. Her voice cracked. What if he goes to the press? Gerald looked at her coldly. Then we bury him again. Mark watched from behind dark sunglasses as people walked into the church, his memorial service. Friends, colleagues, strangers he barely remembered, all wearing black, all believing the lie. He sat 2 rows behind the last pew. Hood up. No one looked twice. The pastor spoke of a kind man, devoted father, loyal son. Mark felt sick. His mother's photo was on the screen, a side-by-side with his father. And him. The ones who had pushed him into the ocean like garbage were now being mourned like saints. He spotted her. Rachel. She walked up to the podium, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Mark loved this family, she said. Her voice shook, just right. He trusted us all. He never doubted. And now he's gone. Mark studied her face, every twitch, every pause. She wasn't grieving. She was performing. The applause that followed made Bao rise in his throat. As she stepped down, she froze. Her eyes met his. Just a moment. A second too long. Then she turned away, shaken. Mark slipped out before she could react. He didn't need a scene. Not yet. But she saw them. And now she'd never sleep without wondering if the next knock on her door would be the end. Jordan's apartment was cluttered, walls covered in monitors, cords snaking across the floor like vines. It smelled like cold pizza and burned coffee. But it was safe. Check this out, Jordan said, spinning his chair around. Your guy, Gerald? He's tied to 3 shadow corporations laundering money through offshore charities. Mark leaned in. One of the charities was registered under Rachel's maiden name. She's not just helping him, Jordan said. She's benefiting. Mark's hands clenched. Can we leak it? He asked. Not yet. We drop small pieces. Enough to trigger curiosity. The big stuff stays until they panic. Mark nodded. Then let's light the fuse. Jordan grinned. Already lit, bro. Mark pulled out a thumb drive. Here's everything from my father's estate. Letters. Trust papers. Signatures Gerald forced. Use it. Jordan plugged it in. We're not just exposing them. Mark's voice was cold now. Unshakable. We're erasing their future. One lie at a time. The walls were closing in, and Rachel felt it in her bones. The envelope. The photo. The look on that man's face in the church. She couldn't sleep. Could barely eat. And now the press was asking questions. Questions that weren't part of the plan. A young reporter named Lacey cornered her outside a boutique fundraiser, voice recorder in hand. Mrs. Dawson, do you have any comment on the recently leaked financials linking your late husband's trust to a Cayman-based firm owned by Gerald Rawlings? Rachel froze mid-step. Excuse me. Is it true that the amendment to the Dawson Trust was made without Mark Dawson's direct approval? Sources suggest. Rachel cut her off with a smile. No further questions. But inside, panic spread like wildfire. Back home, she poured herself another drink. Her 5th. Gerald watched her from the doorway. You're slipping, he said. I'm slipping, she snapped, spinning around. You said he was dead. That we had time. You said this was airtight. Gerald didn't blink. And it is. Unless you start unraveling it. Rachel's eyes welled up. I saw him. At the church. I looked right at him. You saw a ghost, Gerald said coldly. That's what guilt does. It makes you see shadows. But Rachel didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in revenge. And she could feel it coming. Mark didn't need to break into Gerald's estate. He'd already done it. 2 weeks earlier, using the access code his father once gave him, he entered through the east wing while Rachel and Gerald were out for a gala. He moved quietly, deliberately, like a man who'd rehearsed every step. In his backpack, 2 mini audio bugs and a pinhole camera hidden inside a smoke detector shell. One went in the study above Gerald's desk. The other, in the bedroom ceiling fan. It was all live-feeding now, Jordan monitoring from his setup in the apartment. Mark watched on his burner laptop as Gerald sat down in his study days later, phone pressed to his ear. Wire the rest to the Belize account, Gerald said, swirling a glass of scotch. And clean the signature like last time. Mark hit record. A moment later, Rachel entered the room. She didn't look at him. We have a problem, she said. I heard, Gerald muttered. Someone's leaking things, financials, trust info. If this gets out, it's not just your empire. It's everything. Gerald waved her off. They won't trace it. The names are buried. Shells inside shells. Are you sure? She snapped, her voice cracking. Because if he's alive, Gerald stood suddenly. The ice clinked in his glass. Then we finish it. This time, no witnesses. Mark leaned back, breathing through his nose. He closed the laptop slowly. They weren't just greedy. They were dangerous. But now, they were being watched. Every move, every whisper, every dirty dollar. The safe was built into the wall behind a painting, an abstract mess of reds and silvers that Gerald claimed was postmodern pain. Jordan snorted when he saw it through the hidden cam. Yeah, pain in the wallet. Mark timed the break perfectly. Rachel was out at another charity event. Gerald at a private poker game. He slipped inside, gloves on, silent as smoke. The keypad clicked under his fingers. 5-8-2-2-0. His birthday. Of course. The safe door creaked open. Inside, stacks of papers, external drives, a burner phone, a velvet box with 3 passports, and a thin black notebook. Mark opened it. Every page held a secret. Dates, account numbers, names, bribes, political donations, payoffs to offshore judges. But on the last page, one line stood out. Contingency. If Mark returns, blame Rachel. Mark froze. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just betrayed by his wife and stepfather. He was insurance. Gerald had planned to throw Rachel to the wolves the moment the heat came down. Mark took photos of every page. Downloaded files from the external drive. He locked everything back in place and slipped out like a shadow. Back at the motel, he showed Jordan the notebook. This isn't just leverage, Jordan whispered. This is nuclear. Mark stared at the pages. They thought I was soft, he said again. Then his voice hardened. They're about to see what I do when I stop being soft. Kyle sat on the edge of the motel bed, legs swinging, holding his drawing pad in his lap. Dad, why did Grandma push us? Mark froze mid-step, halfway through folding a clean shirt. The air seemed to thicken around them. Kyle's eyes were wide, but serious. Not scared, just needing truth. Mark sat beside him slowly. Because they made a very bad choice, he said, carefully. And they thought, if we were gone, they could take something that didn't belong to them. Kyle looked down. Did Mom know? Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at his son, his small, innocent face, and realized this was the moment. The one where childhood ended, even if softly. She was part of it, he said finally. She helped them. Kyle didn't cry. He just stared ahead for a moment, then started drawing again. Mark glanced down. The picture showed a woman standing next to a man with angry eyes. Behind them, 2 small stick figures, one taller, one shorter, floating in the water. He swallowed hard. Kyle didn't need to ask more. He knew. Will they go to jail? Kyle asked quietly. Mark's jaw tensed. Yes. Kyle nodded once. Good. Mark put a hand on his shoulder. And after that, We'll have a real home again. A safe one. Kyle leaned against him without a word. The past had nearly drowned them, but the future still had a shore. The newsroom of the Post-Press buzzed louder than usual. Editor-in-Chief Dana Millis stared at her screen, reading the latest anonymous leak with narrowed eyes. The subject line simply said, "Truth is buried. Time to dig." Attached were documents, real estate transfers, trust paperwork, offshore transactions, and an audio file. She clicked play. Gerald's voice filled the room. "Wire the rest. And clean the signature like last time." Dana leaned back, stunned. "You have got to be kidding me," she called in her top investigative reporter, Marcus. "You're not going to believe this." Back in the motel, Mark watched it all unfold live. The headline appeared within the hour. Murdered man's estate funneled into secret accounts. Rawlings' empire exposed. The story went viral by evening. Rachel's name was in the second paragraph. Not accused yet, but connected. Jordan burst into the room, eyes wide. "Dude, the story's blowing up. Reddit, TikTok, Insta. Everyone's on it." Mark didn't smile. Not yet. This was just pressure. The real crack was still coming. At Gerald's estate, Rachel screamed at the TV. "You said there was no trail." Gerald threw his phone at the wall. "There wasn't." "Then how the hell is this out?" she shouted. He stormed past her, muttering, "Someone's feeding them. Someone close." Rachel froze. Because deep down, she already knew who it was. And that meant one terrifying thing. Mark was alive. Gerald stood in his study, pacing like a man watching his empire tip toward collapse. 2 burner phones on the desk. 3 monitors open. Liquor half gone. He made a call. "Listen, if anyone comes asking questions, you don't know me. You never did." "Got it." Mark listened from his motel, audio live from the bug. The call continued. "We handled the Dawson situation. He's out. His wife inherited everything. The kids with the grandparents. It's done." Pause. Then Gerald added, "And if he did survive, I'll bury him for real this time." Mark sat in silence. There it was. Not just fraud. Not just betrayal. Intent. Jordan stared at him. "That's it. That's the smoking gun." Mark exhaled slow. Measured. "It's not enough yet." Jordan blinked. "What do you mean?" He literally just admitted, "It's enough for headlines." "Not for court," Mark replied. "I want a trial. I want them exposed in front of the world. Not locked away quietly." Jordan nodded slowly, understanding. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth and justice, and making sure Rachel and Gerald never got to rewrite the story again. Mark stood, grabbed his coat. "Let's go light another match." Rachel stared at the television screen, lips parted, hands trembling around a wine glass she hadn't sipped in hours. The headline burned like fire. Inside the Rawlings fortune, a web of fraud, lies, and a missing man. Under it, her name. Full. Centered. In bold. Reporters waited outside the mansion. Drones hovered overhead. Journalists circled like vultures. She hadn't slept. Couldn't eat. Every corner felt like a trap. Inside the estate, she found Gerald in the study, drinking from a bottle now, no more glasses. "You need to do something," she snapped. "I am doing something," he growled. Rachel paced. "They're digging. The press, the law, everyone's watching now. If they subpoena the trust, let them." Gerald stood slowly. "We'll settle. We'll spin it. The media moves fast." She turned, eyes wild. "You don't get it. I saw him, Gerald. At the church. He was there." Gerald stared at her. "You're unraveling." "No," she whispered. "You just can't see the cracks because you're already falling through them." Her phone vibrated. A text. Unknown number. Still playing the grieving wife? Shame that role never fit. She dropped the phone. Gerald picked it up and read it silently. "Jesus," he muttered. Rachel sat down, shaking. Because if that message was real, then the nightmare wasn't coming. It was already inside. Back in Jordan's apartment, Mark watched the video loop again. An old news report, buried on an encrypted site Jordan had hacked into. No public tags. No SEO. Just one name. Isabel Raines. "Who's she?" Mark asked. Jordan leaned forward. Gerald's ex-wife. Disappeared 12 years ago. No body. No charges. Just gone. Mark frowned. Same pattern. Worse. She filed a domestic complaint before vanishing. Claimed Gerald was manipulating finances, isolating her, pushing her toward a mental breakdown. Sound familiar? Mark's stomach sank. He clicked through scanned documents, court filings, therapy records, a restraining order request that was mysteriously withdrawn. Then one final document. A legal will. Isabel had named Mark Dawson's father as her emergency contact. Mark's breath caught. My dad knew her? Jordan nodded. And Gerald buried it. That's why he needed your father gone. And why he married Rachel right after. Mark sat back, stunned. This wasn't just about inheritance or jealousy. It was about a pattern. A cycle of women used, discarded, and written out. Rachel had been a pawn too. A willing one, but a pawn nonetheless. Mark leaned forward. Is she alive? Last trace of her was a wire transfer from a fake name, in Colorado. Mark stood. Then we find her. Jordan blinked. You think she'll talk? If she's alive, and knows what he did? Mark's voice tightened. She won't just talk. She'll testify. The air in Colorado was thin, sharp with mountain wind. The address wasn't listed on any map. It was a cabin tucked into the woods, silent, untouched. Mark stood on the porch, heart racing. He knocked once. Nothing. Twice. Then the door creaked open an inch. A pale face peeked through, a woman in her early 50s, gray streaked through dark hair, cautious eyes that scanned him like a threat. Yes. Isabel Raines? Mark asked. Silence. Then, slowly, she opened the door wider. I used to be, she said. Mark stepped forward. My name is Mark Dawson. Gerald Rawlings tried to kill me. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She just nodded. I figured he'd try again someday. Mark blinked. You knew? I knew what he was, she said, stepping aside. No one believed me back then. Cops laughed. Lawyers took his money. He followed her inside. The walls were covered in notes, photos, documents, like she'd never stopped collecting evidence. I have everything, she said. Everything he did. The bribed judge. The paid therapist. Even how he had your father's will changed. I couldn't stop him. But maybe you can. Mark looked around. This wasn't a woman hiding. This was a woman waiting. Waiting for someone to survive long enough to come looking. And now that Mark had, she wasn't just going to speak. She was going to end him. The courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet chaos. Attorneys pacing, reporters whispering, and security officers scanning each face with routine suspicion. Mark stood by the metal detector, hair tied back, wearing a plain black blazer. No theatrics. No revenge fantasy face. Just clarity. Beside him, Isabel Raines signed an affidavit. She was real, calm, composed, and ready. I cannot believe we're doing this, she said softly. Mark didn't look away from the elevator doors. Believe it. They made it real. They met with ADA Colleen Mercer, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor who had already seen the post-press leak. You're saying this man has committed financial fraud, manipulated trusts, and, allegedly, tried to have you murdered? She asked, scanning the documents Jordan compiled. No, Mark replied. Not allegedly. Colleen paused, then leaned in. Do you have direct evidence? I have wire transfers, altered wills, recorded threats, and the woman he tried to erase from existence. Mark said, motioning toward Isabel. Isabel smiled grimly. He buried me in silence. But silence doesn't last forever. The ADA closed the file. If you're serious, this is going to be messy. High profile. They'll come at you hard. Mark leaned forward. I want them to. I want the truth loud. Outside, a reporter spotted Mark through the glass. Cameras clicked. The resurrection wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a thunderclap. Rachel threw clothes into a suitcase like her hands were on fire. Dresses, jewelry, passports, anything that would fit. Her breathing was erratic. Her makeup smeared. This wasn't preparation. This was panic. Gerald stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You're making it worse. She spun on him. Worse? Do you have any idea what's coming? They have nothing that sticks, he replied. They have Mark. Alive. Walking into a courthouse with your ex-wife like it's a Netflix special. And what do we have? A burned photo and a fake will. Gerald moved closer. If you run now, you will look guilty. I am guilty, Gerald, she screamed, eyes glassy. We both are. You promised he was gone. You promised I'd be safe. His face changed. Less anger, more calculation. You're spiraling. No. I'm realizing, she whispered. Realizing you used me. Just like her. She grabbed the suitcase and shoved past him. He didn't stop her. Didn't even follow. Because in Gerald's world, everyone was disposable. Rachel included. It wasn't part of the plan. Mark was supposed to wait. Let the courts play their game. Let the media grind the lies into dust. But when he saw Rachel walking toward the airport terminal, alone, hoodie up, sunglasses on, he couldn't help himself. He stepped into her path. She froze. Their eyes met. Finally, without glass, without cameras, without masks. You're dead, she whispered. Mark's voice was low. Even. You look good for a grieving widow. She swallowed hard. I didn't know they would actually. He took a step closer. Save it. Tears welled up. Mark, you pushed us into the ocean. You watched me drown. While holding his hand, he pointed toward her suitcase. Running won't save you. Rachel's hands trembled. You don't understand what he did to me. I understand exactly what he did. And I understand you helped him. Security guards glanced over, curious, but not moving yet. Rachel reached into her coat, pulled out something folded. She shoved it into Mark's hand. A flash drive. What's this? Her voice broke. Everything. Emails. Bank transfers. The hit. He never planned to keep me alive. I wasn't a partner. I was next. Mark stared at her, breathing hard. For the first time, he saw it. Not defiance. Not arrogance. Fear. Not of him, but of Gerald. Rachel wasn't just a traitor. She'd been a target, too. Mark did not have to leak the flash drive. The press did it for him. By morning, news anchors were practically shouting over each other on live broadcasts. Rawlings exposed. Exclusive evidence of a cover-up, attempted murder, and fraud. The data Rachel handed over was airtight, hundreds of bank transfers, hidden shell companies, even a signed offshore agreement proving Gerald authorized a crisis payout if Mark's body was never recovered. But it was the last file that hit hardest. A video. Rachel, 2 weeks before the cruise, in a tear-streaked voice, whispering into her phone, "If something happens to Mark, it wasn't me. It was him. I tried to stop it." And just like that, the narrative flipped. The media hounded Gerald now. Drones swarmed his property. News vans parked across his driveway. A protester even spray-painted the word "killer" across his front gate. Inside, Gerald watched it all with a blank face, the TV casting flickering shadows across his marble floor. Then came the knock. 2 federal agents. Dark suits. Neutral expressions. "Mr. Rawlings," one said calmly, "you're going to need to come with us." Rachel sat in a federal interrogation room, alone. The metal chair was cold. Her palms were slick with sweat. The door opened. ADA Colleen Mercer entered, dropped a file on the table. "We already have what we need to bring Gerald down. But your cooperation could put him away for life." Rachel didn't speak. Mercer leaned forward. "You don't walk out of here clean. But you walk out at all, if you talk." Rachel looked down. She remembered Gerald's voice in her ear. "If this blows up, you go down first." She remembered the night Mark returned. The way his eyes saw through her. The pain in his voice when he said, "You helped him." Now she had a choice. She looked up. "I'll testify," she said. Mercer raised an eyebrow. "Fully." Rachel nodded. "Everything. Names, dates, plans, and the day he told me my husband wouldn't come back." The ADA closed the folder slowly. "Then we'll see what justice can do." The courtroom was packed. Press lined the walls. Bloggers live-tweeted every moment. Former investors sat stiffly behind the prosecution bench, some with arms crossed, others red-faced in quiet fury. Mark entered through the side door, composed. In his suit, He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a man who came back from the dead to bury his betrayers. Gerald sat opposite, flanked by 3 attorneys. But even his $1 million suit couldn't hide the weight in his eyes. This wasn't a scandal. It was a reckoning. Judge Langdon entered, and the room snapped to order. Colleen Mercer rose. The state will prove that Gerald Rawlings, with full intent and strategic planning, attempted to erase Mark Dawson, physically, financially, and legally, for personal gain. Gerald's attorney countered. Mr. Rawlings denies all allegations and believes he is the victim of an elaborate smear campaign by a man who faked his own death. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. But then Rachel was called. She walked slowly to the stand. Eyes clear. Voice steady. She sat. Took a breath. My name is Rachel Dawson. And I am here because I made the biggest mistake of my life, trusting Gerald Rawlings. All eyes locked on her. Mark watched from the bench, silent. The truth had finally taken the stand. The courtroom was already tense when the prosecution introduced Exhibit 71, an audio file. Judge Langdon looked over his glasses. Is this the recording obtained from the defendant's private residence? Yes, Your Honor, Colleen Mercer replied. She clicked play. Gerald's voice crackled through the speakers, smooth and chilling. If he did survive, I'll bury him for real this time. Gasps echoed through the gallery. A woman in the back dropped her notepad. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Gerald shifted in his seat. Mark didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the man who had tried to erase him. The recording continued. Make sure the trust passes without hiccups. Rachel's a wreck. Use that. If she flips, we throw her to the wolves. She's always been weak. Rachel flinched in her chair. Gerald's attorney stood. Your Honor, we object. Sustained, the judge said. But the jury will consider the context already entered. Outside, the media exploded. Within minutes, the audio hit social media. Hashtag Gerald the Ghost trended nationwide. Commentators called him a snake in a suit. Every investor that ever backed him pulled out. Back inside, Gerald clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ground audibly. Mark watched. Not with revenge in his eyes, but quiet, steady justice. Everything Gerald built was now falling under its own weight. And it was far from over. The courtroom was silent as Mark stepped up to the witness stand, then knelt beside a table easel. He placed a large, laminated copy of Kyle's drawing. It showed 2 small figures in blue water, one larger hand holding a smaller one. Above them, 3 people stood near the railing of a cruise ship. One wore glasses. Another had a necklace. All had blank eyes. This drawing, Mark said, voice clear, was done by my son, Kyle. He was 7. He drew it 4 days after we were pushed off that cruise ship. The jury leaned in. He didn't understand betrayal. He just drew what he remembered. That necklace, he pointed, Rachel wore it. The man with glasses? Gerald. Rachel couldn't look up. The prosecutor asked, was this before or after you told Kyle what happened? I didn't, Mark said. This was his memory, not mine. The room was still. Colleen turned to the jury. This is not just art. It's evidence from a child who didn't know how to lie. Gerald's attorney fumbled for an objection. The judge waved it down. The image stayed up through the recess. And the public saw it too, shared across the internet. A child's hand, sketching his survival. Innocence had become the courtroom's sharpest blade. And it cut deep. The jury filed back into the room. 12 faces. All unreadable. One verdict. The judge nodded. Has the jury reached a decision? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. A beat of silence. In the matter of attempted murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit homicide against Gerald Rawlings, we find the defendant. Rachel held her breath. Mark didn't blink. Guilty on all counts. A collective gasp surged through the gallery. Gerald closed his eyes. The judge's gavel hit like thunder. Sentencing to be scheduled. Defendant is to be remanded immediately. Gerald stood, slow, almost calm. But as the bailiffs approached, he whispered something that chilled Mark to the bone. You climbed out of the water, but it never leaves you. Mark met his eyes one final time. You're right, he said. But it also never lets you come back. As they dragged Gerald away, cameras flashed. Rachel slumped back in her seat, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Mark stood alone, alive, vindicated, and for the first time in years, free. The cemetery was quiet. Gray clouds hung low, and the wind whispered through bare trees as Mark stood before two graves, his parents. Fresh flowers lay at one, weather-worn stone at the other. Carl stood beside him, holding a small laminated version of his drawing. He didn't say much. He hadn't asked to come, Mark had. Not for closure, but for clarity. Mark knelt, placed the drawing gently at the base of the stone. He stared at the carved names, people who raised him, then betrayed him for money. You made your choice, he said softly. Now I'm making mine. Carl looked up at him. What did you say, Dad? Mark forced a smile. Just goodbye. They walked away without turning back. On the way to the car, Kyle tugged his hand. Do we ever have to see them again? Mark knelt, meeting his eyes. No, never again. Kyle nodded once. And that was it. No ceremony. No forgiveness. Just the quiet freedom of walking away from ashes that no longer mattered. It was visiting day. Mark didn't want to go, but part of him knew he had to. Rachel sat behind a thick layer of bulletproof glass, orange jumpsuit dull against the concrete walls of the women's detention center. Her eyes were swollen, lips chapped, hands fidgeting. She didn't look like the woman who once smiled beside Gerald at rooftop parties. She looked like someone who'd finally stopped pretending. Mark picked up the phone first. You asked for this meeting. She mirrored him. I needed to say something, and I knew. I wouldn't get another chance. He said nothing. She looked down. I was wrong. About everything. About him. About you. I thought money could fix things. I thought love was negotiable. Mark's jaw tensed, but he kept his tone calm. And Kyle? Her eyes filled. I never hated him. I was just blind. No, Mark said coldly. You were selfish. Silence passed. Then Rachel placed her palm against the glass. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. Mark didn't move. Didn't lift his hand. He looked at her one last time. You're not the only one who has to live with your choices. Then he hung up the phone. She didn't try to stop him. Because deep down, she knew. He wasn't angry anymore. He was done. The courtroom was quieter this time. No cameras. No press frenzy. Just sentencing. Mark sat in the gallery, no longer as a victim, but as a witness to closure. Gerald wore the same gray suit from the first day of trial, now wrinkled and loose at the collar. His eyes held no panic, just calculation. As if even now, he believed there was a play to make. Judge Langdon didn't give him the chance. Gerald Rawlings, the judge said, voice firm. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A murmur rippled through the room. Gerald didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply turned, met Mark's gaze, and gave the faintest smile. Not a smirk, not defiance, resignation. As if he finally understood that the empire he built was dust. Mark stood outside the courthouse minutes later, the cold air biting his skin. He didn't cry, didn't smile. He just breathed. For the first time in years, he could finally breathe. The house was small, quiet. A single-story cabin just outside Asheville, North Carolina, woods on three sides, a lake just beyond the back porch. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't grand. But it was theirs. Mark stood barefoot in the kitchen, brewing coffee as morning light poured in through the windows. Carl sat at the table, scribbling in a new sketchbook. This time, the figures weren't drowning. They were fishing. Want breakfast? Mark asked. Carl nodded. Can I make the eggs? Mark smiled. Only if you don't burn them like last time. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally normal. No bodyguards. No trial. No reporters. Just breathing, living, and healing. Later that day, Mark pulled an old duffel bag from the closet, the same one he'd carried since Cuba. Inside was the last file. The last video. The full confession Gerald had made to his private partner in a wire room. The only one they hadn't played in court. Mark stared at it for a moment. Then quietly, he dropped it into the fireplace. Some things didn't need to live forever. Some victories didn't need to be repeated. 2 weeks later, Mark sat across from a well-dressed agent in a Denver cafe. "I'm just saying," the man said, laying out a contract. "Your story's viral. Everyone wants it. Netflix. Audible. We can start with a book and work into a series deal. 7 figures, easy." Mark looked at the paper. The numbers were real. The signatures were ready. He took a sip of his coffee. "What if I say no?" The agent blinked. "Excuse me." Mark leaned back. "This story almost killed me. It's my son's nightmares. It's the reason my name went from respected to whispered." He set the pen down. "I'm not for sale." The agent scoffed. "You could change lives." Mark smiled faintly. "I'm already doing that. Just not on camera." And with that, he stood. Because the real story wasn't about how it ended. It was about what he refused to carry forward. Jordan stood in front of a small crowd, dozens of people seated in a community tech center in Atlanta. A sign hung overhead. Digital Safety Foundation, protecting families from financial exploitation and betrayal. Behind him was a photo wall. Cases they'd helped solve. Names cleared. Assets recovered. Scams stopped. He adjusted the mic. "I was just a hacker once," he said. "But this is real. This is for the ones who never saw it coming." Mark stood in the back, arms folded, proud. After the trial, Jordan had taken a portion of the civil settlement money and built something new. A legacy. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was protecting futures. Later that night, Mark clapped him on the back. "You built something out of ashes." Jordan grinned. "You handed me the match, brother." They both laughed. Because some scars didn't need to fade to make something beautiful. The courtroom was smaller this time. Just a few benches. No cameras. No jury. Only a judge, a clerk, and a piece of paper. "Do you understand the request being made today, Mr. Dawson?" the judge asked. Mark nodded. Kyle sat beside him, holding his hand. "We're requesting a legal name change," Mark said, "to remove any trace of the Rawlings surname from his record, from our lives." The judge peered down over her glasses. "To what?" "Kyle Thomas Dawson," Mark replied. The judge smiled. "Approved." The gavel tapped once. Kyle grinned. "Can I sign it too?" The clerk handed him a pen. And just like that, a name born out of betrayal was erased. And a new one, born of survival, love, and truth, was made whole. The mailbox was already overflowing with flyers and bills, but Mark spotted the envelope instantly. No return address. Thin. Handwritten. He knew the penmanship before he opened it. "Rachel." He stepped inside, tossed the rest of the mail on the counter, and opened the letter in the silence of the kitchen. "Mark, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I know what I was. What I became. You once asked me if I ever loved you. The truth is, I did. But not enough. Not when it counted most. Gerald didn't force me to betray you. I chose it. I believed the lie that safety and power mattered more than truth. That love was replaceable. That pain could be buried. You proved me wrong. You didn't just survive. You rose. I heard about Kyle's name. It's right that he carries yours, not mine. If I could go back, I'd change everything. But I can't. So I'll just say this. Live. Really live. For him. For you. For the life we should have built." Rachel. Mark set the letter down. He didn't feel angry. Or relieved. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that came not from getting even, but from getting through. He walked out back where Kyle was stacking stones by the lake, trying to make a tower taller than his last one. Mark joined him, sitting beside him in the dirt. "Want help?" he asked. Kyle smiled. "Only if you don't knock it over again." Mark grinned. "No promises." He glanced at the fading sky, then back to the child beside him. Rachel had been part of his storm. But this was his horizon. It had been exactly 1 year. Same day. Same hour. Mark stood alone on the deck of a small rental boat drifting off the coast of Florida, not far from where it had all happened. No crowd. No speeches. Just silence and water. In his hand were 2 white roses. One for himself. One for Kyle. Symbols of what they lost and what they found. He tossed the first one gently into the sea. It floated for a second before drifting away. Then the second. It took a bit longer. The waves had changed, somehow. Not calmer. Just different. Like they knew who he was now. Mark closed his eyes. He remembered the fall. The cold. The betrayal. But then he remembered climbing back out. He remembered the look on Gerald's face when the verdict was read. The way Kyle held his hand in court. The sound of the judge changing Kyle's last name. The feel of dry land under their feet that first morning back. He opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Not shaky. Not broken. Clean. He looked down at the water. Goodbye, he whispered. Not to Rachel. Not to his parents. Not even to the man he used to be. Just to the storm. He turned the boat back toward the shore. Because the sea had taken enough. And now it was time to go home. The lake was quiet that morning. Mist curled across the surface like breath in cold air, and a soft wind moved through the tall grass behind the house. Mark sat on the back porch, coffee in hand, watching Kyle chase a paper airplane across the yard. Every so often, the boy would stop, adjust the wings, and throw it again, determined to make it fly farther. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a mansion. But this place, this life, was real. He thought of everything it took to get here. Not just survival, but choice. He could have disappeared. Let the system bury it. Let his name stay erased and rebuild in silence. But instead, he faced it. Faced them. And now? He'd taken back every piece they tried to steal. Kyle ran up to him, grinning. I made a new one, he said, waving a freshly folded plane. This one's stronger. Mark smiled. Yeah? What's different about it? I used the thicker paper, Kyle said proudly, so it doesn't fold when the wind hits it. Mark looked at the paper, then at his son, then out over the lake. That was it. That was the whole thing. You don't avoid the wind. You build stronger wings. As the sun rose over the trees, warming the quiet earth, Mark stood up and stepped forward, voice steady, heart full. You and me, kid, he said softly. We made it. Kyle looked up. Yeah, Dad, we really did. They walked back inside together. A quiet house. A clean slate. No ghosts. No games. Just life. And as the screen door clicked shut behind them, one last question hung in the air. One for you reading this right now. If someone tried to erase you, would you let them? Let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. I want to know how far this story's reached. If this story gripped your heart even for a moment, give it a like. Share it with someone who'd never see it coming. And hit subscribe for more stories that punch like truth and burn like revenge. Because some stories don't just entertain, they wake you up.